one. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming and joining us on a sunny Friday at the Open Security Summit. We're going to be doing hands-on work in this session and the next. So for the next 2 hours, we will be working on user stories for Application Security Verification Standard, which is an OWASP project and standard. We have Mario with us. We have done a similar exercise back in June, I think, sometime during the original summit session. And this has been waiting for all of us to join together and work on it. So I'm gonna leave the proper explanation to Mario, and I'll be your host for the session.
Great. Thank you all very much for joining. As Dida was mentioning, the topic for today will be user stories for ASVS, which is something that we started working about a year ago. Then it went a bit stopped about 2 months ago. I started working on this again. Now there's a new repo that is aggregating all of this information, which before we break out into rooms, I'm going to just show you the structure of the repo and some of the tests and some of the things that we already have there before we move further. So what we'll be covering today is what the ASVS is in a nutshell, just to explain the high-level domains, what are we trying to do with this creation of user stories, why thinking in terms of user stories, what are them, what's the anatomy of a story, and also some examples that I can share with you. And then we're gonna talk about what we'll be doing for the remainder of the session. So the application security verification standard. The reason why I added this is if you don't, it's going to be important when we go to the breakout rooms that that we have the standard in front of us, because we'll be going through some of the things already there. But in a nutshell, the ASVS has all of these domains. So we have domains for architecture, design and threat modeling, authentication, session management, access control, validation, synthesization and encoding, cryptography, error handling, data protection, communications, malicious code, business logic, file and resources, API and web service, and configuration. The reason 3 of them are marked in green, they are the ones that I've started developing some of the tests already. Well, that I've continued developing some of the tests already, and it's also part of the work that myself, Didar, Louis, and a few other people have worked last year that I've integrated into this work as well. So those are the areas that at the moment we have tests for most of the level 1 in ASVS. And so as part of this session, when we break out into rooms, we will be working on the other ones that we haven't worked on yet. That's the plan. So why not just use OWASP ASVS? So I'm a huge fan, as I'm sure all of you are, of OWASP projects. But in my opinion, and some people from OWASP disagree with me on this, so I want just to stress that this is my personal opinion. I think there's a bit of a black box in the middle in terms of the guidance, right? So we've got the OWASP ASVS standard, which is kind of a checklist type document that talks about security in all of these domains and gives us a good view if we want to go kind of line by line on each of the items to understand how secure we're building our applications, which is the perfect type of artifact for your traditional security and compliance team, right? Because it gives you a checklist. You can kind of go with a pen and paper and just say check, 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 and go through the whole standard and see what you're meeting and you're not. The thing is, that's not necessarily the best way to expose the engineering community to security requirements. And although we do have on the right-hand side things such as the OWASP cheat sheet that gives you actual snippets of code that you can verify, and that the engineers can look at to understand how error handling is done, how input validation is done, etc. And we also have projects such as the testing guide that give you actual code that they can use to verify if your applications are compliant, that you can then integrate into CI/CD, etc. I think there's this black box in the middle is what does this mean to an agile process, right? So when we're talking with product owners, when we're talking, when we're establishing a product roadmap, how do we integrate the attainment of those objectives into the agile delivery process? And I don't think that's something that is currently covered in any way in the OWASP projects. There is an element so if you know the security knowledge framework, which is also an OWASP project that I've been using to provide a lot of the guidance on the stories that I've been creating. There is kind of an element of different ways you can approach the delivery of the control, but we really don't get much guidance on helping teams actually pull from a shelf or use a story that can integrate quickly to understand what it is and how they can start planning into their roadmap. So that was the reason why I created this Agile Delivery Guide. So I'm not trying to come up with any new application security requirements. Those are all addressed in OWASP ASVS. And I'm not trying to give snippets of code on how things are implemented, right? That also already exists. What we're trying to do with this project is really kind of bridge the gap between the two so that we have a way to inform engineering teams on how they can approach the issue of application security. Okay. So this was kind of the context on why I started working on this. So what it aims to achieve is twofold. So I think, in my opinion, there's something for the engineering teams and there's something for risk and compliance. On what's in it for engineering teams is that you get access to actionable user stories that you can just get from the shelf. Let's say you go to the repo, you see something that is relevant and you can start using it straight away. And it's written in a way that makes sense in the context of their development. So they're already using user stories. They're already doing all of those agile practices. So instead of just giving them a blank page with a number of 100 rows, a spreadsheet with 100 rows, and say you need to be meeting these, I can tell them, look, these are the different user stories that relate to those requirements. Now you can just pull them into your backlog as we advance, as we either threat model or whatever the practice we may have in place to confirm that they need to be part of your requirements. They need to be part of what the team delivers on. So the one thing that I didn't do, I'm happy to reconsider. So obviously I started this project, but I don't want this to be mine. This is something that I'd really like to work with the community on. But I'm generally not very, I think acceptance criteria is very, very contextual, even though there are some that are kind of relatively simple. So if we're talking about configuration validation, configuration verification, which is mostly about cookies, right? That would be relatively simple to also drop down acceptance criteria. But for everything else, I think it's very contextual. So, and I'm looking at this from the perspective also of agency from engineers, right? And the habit that security traditionally has had to tell people exactly what to do, right? That leaves no room for the agency on how they're going to do it. So that's why I thought that trying to add into this project acceptance criteria would kind of defeat the purpose of the agency that we want to give engineers to own the how of how they decide to implement some of these things. And then for the risk and compliance teams, I think it gives them even more benefits than maybe it does the engineering teams, because one of the things that is very that I believe, at least from my experience, happens a lot is that compliance teams see the role once they write a policy document and put it on a Word document. Many of them think their job is done, right? That they've written what the policies are. Now it's someone else's job to actually go and understand what it means to them and how they should integrate that work in what they're developing. The challenge with that is that we've got this communication problem, right? In people that are working at different time spans, at different tempos, even. This allows them to start the journey of thinking in user stories, thinking in BDD/Gherkin syntax, etc. And that helps them not only give something of a bit more value and more integrated into the format that the engineering community is used to, but it also serves to, if as I believe is happening, the wider context that compliance teams are starting to codify their requirements as code, right? And I think that's where the direction of travel for the industry as a whole. I think getting used to writing user stories and Gherkin syntax on those user stories is a good intermediate step to get to the point where you're actually codifying as code, either using compliance as code DSLs, or if your teams are already using particular testing frameworks like, let's say, JavaScript with Jest or Cypress or whatever may be the case, it gives them a view into some snippets of code that they can then integrate and understand what it is that is required, because engineers understand tests. They can read a test and understand what it is that they need to do. If we just give them kind of some fluffy requirements of a spreadsheet, it might not be as clear, right? So I think this, yeah, there was kind of the motivation behind doing this.
Yeah,
So,
I want to say, yeah,
yep.
I sit in that second column.
Yes.
My title is exactly risk and compliance infosec. So it's, and I agree that we should be better. That's why I'm really interested in this. And I also know I'm coming from risk and compliance from second line risk and not from an engineering background. It is very challenging for me to write one user story. Last time it took Louis to explain to me so many times. It did really require so much collaboration, and that's why I think this project is so important, because there are many other risk people like me who understands that we need to do something different and differently, but don't have the capabilities to do it ourselves. So it's why, that's why we need all of you to help us in this project.
And also comes to the sense of inadequacy, right? So I'm going to talk from my own experience, right? Back in kind of late 90s, early 2000s, when I was kind of starting my career in technology, I became a system administrator because I really didn't want to have anything to do with code development, right? That was really not my thing. It was much in terms of my, I kind of avoided on purpose becoming a developer because that was just not my thing. Right? But in the meantime, the world changed, right? And the expectations change. And we no longer have waterfall. We're now having something that people call DevOps, and the way the interactions between teams happen also change. So that means that if we're still doing risk and compliance like we were doing 10, 15 years ago, it means that we have not caught up with, we have not considered the changes in how technology teams are currently structured, on how they currently work, and we haven't adapted our outputs to support that particular activity, right? And that's why I think also that this becomes more important. So, and I know very few teams that actually do user stories for the things that they do. So why user stories, right? So defining requirements as static checklists is kind of optimized for the gatekeepers, right? It's optimized for the people that are used to ticking the boxes, verifying against big control frameworks, etc., and validating one by one, do we meet these things or not? And there are very valid reasons to have that approach, because for instance, today that I spent more than 2 hours replying to a supplier questionnaire, those are things that we get asked about, right? My job, if I'm having my risk and compliance hat, is actually understand how all of those things are mapped against, so I can say, yes, Mr. Client, I am doing this. No, I'm not doing this. These are my compensating controls, right? That's part of my job as a risk and compliance person. So it's really about making sure that those that those things kind of tie in together. Most technical teams use user stories already to define their backlog. So the more we can speak in a way that they can readily consume, the more chances we will have of being perceived as someone that is making an effort to give them what they need, how they need it, as opposed to my job finished when I wrote a policy. Now you need to go figure out what that means to you, right? And that is kind of the thing that that we're trying to avoid, or that we should try to avoid.
In some places I've seen non-functional requirements saying be PCI compliant, be GDPR compliant.
Yep.
Great. What does it mean?
Yep, it doesn't. That's in another talk that I gave, what I call the new regulation syndrome, right? Is the compliance people saying it depends, and the engineer saying I need a spec to build to, right? And so there is kind of a non-virtuous cycle or loop that sometimes I see in terms of tension between risk and compliance teams and engineering teams. So what are user stories? So user stories are small pieces of work that represent some value, right? There's a lot of conversation in people with different opinions that user stories should really only be client value, but obviously we're trying to deal with non-functional requirements that in most non-highly regulated spaces, your customer won't be looking for them, right? You're doing this to protect the organization, not necessarily because your client or your customer is asking you to have a particular security feature, right? So there's yeah, some people think you should only do user stories for things that have functional value, but yeah, I am not of that opinion, generally speaking. And the user story should be able to be delivered in a sprint, right? So depending on how big the work is, yeah, there are different things that could fit that part. One of the things that we can say is another thing that is largely accepted is the invest criteria. So in terms of understanding how good your story is, or if you're building stories that have a chance of being delivered within the constraints of a sprint. So the first one is that it should be independent, right? So it should be able to be developed in any sequence, and it shouldn't affect much of other work going on. The other part, and the reason why I didn't want to go into acceptance criteria so far, is that it should be up to the team to decide how to implement it. Right, so we can tell them this is the requirement, but how it actually gets done should be something that the team have agency over defining what that is. It should be valuable, right? So it should deliver a detached unit of value to end users. So this is easier to justify generally if we've got big compliance requirements, or that we're being tracked either contractually or by some standard that we need to adhere to and be externally audited on, but doesn't necessarily need to be the case. It should be estimable. So we should be able to say this is going to take roughly X amount of time. And it should be small, and because we should be able to go through the whole cycle, so design, code, and test in one sprint. Right? And this is the part that is really important, that often, because security doesn't tend to speak in user stories, that is often forgotten, right? So we do a specific security transformation to deliver a mitigation or security feature, but we don't ensure that the tests that will continuously validate that their mitigation is in place and working as we expected is going to be there. And what that means is we're not enabling the organization to work safely, because a month down the line, maybe some functional change needs to happen that invalidates the mitigation we've put in place, and we didn't build what we needed to have that continuous validation that the mitigation is still effective, right? And that's another benefit of starting to think in terms of user stories and integrating our workflows directly into how engineers work.
Mario, can I interrupt?
Yeah, sure.
I just have to throw something in there to what you're saying. This criteria on the dependent side, and from experience of actually having worked with this and implemented this in the large institution, actually goes against the negotiable part, in the sense that it has to do with the way that it's tested. So from a developer perspective, what I mean to say by that is that the repetition inside of a user story is actually beneficial. If you consider that, you might use some code to read through it, and in a web application, for example, go through 4 or 5 screens, and you don't have to write code for each one of them. So to refine maybe the way that the independent is written, because if you actually need to change one, and that would be a change on a particular view on that example that I gave you, right? That means that you'll have to go and change the other ones unless you want to have a lot of code to maintain each one of the stories. Sense? And on the previous one, but it was only on the end user bit. The end user, because you can be as a developer, as a business intelligence, or as the end user. I was just going to suggest to change the end user on the previous slide.
Yep. So just bear in mind, this was not me doing. This is part of the agile body of work. I'm just talking about this as a way to frame how we could potentially think about this from a security point of view. But
Mhm.
the invest stuff, it wasn't me coming up with it. That's agile body of knowledge.
It is basically for the benefit of the development team,
Yep.
because the way that I saw this done was QA team was actually writing those from business people actually passing that data. So business analyst talks to QA, QA writes it, passes to the developer, and then the developer has to do all of the lift and try to make that into a Selenium testable, behavior-driven app, if you call it like that. And it would go actually again. So I would challenge this. No, I'm not saying that they're wrong. They're not. I understand what is there, but something to bear in mind.
Yep. So, as with anything, there are always valid exceptions, right? In all of that, right? But this is, for someone who's new to user stories. I think it's a valuable criteria, and it's part of the agile body of knowledge as well. But good point, and thank you for sharing.
No, you're grand, you're grand.
So, in terms of the a story is usually written as a type of user, right? And this is where the first thing to think in terms of user stories is who we're doing this for, and this will be highly contextual. Right? For some organizations or some teams, it may make sense to say, as a security engineer, as a security manager, as a DevOps or a platform engineer, as a developer, this will be highly contextual and something that, generally speaking, I don't think security teams should be trying to mandate any of that. There are obviously parts of the standard that lend themselves better to a certain type of persona as opposed to another one, right? So, for instance, the first domain of ASVS, which is the threat modeling, architecture, design, that is probably persona of security manager generally may make more sense, right? But usually those would not be things that we push down to the engineering teams, right? That's more the work of the security function to build those capabilities. But the idea is that we've got a type of persona that wants an action so that they can get the benefit, right? And this is kind of the simplest way to try and describe a story. Again, there are many different ways of writing stories. So if you go online and search for it, there are companies that in teams that do this in different ways. They have slightly different things, but this is generally the approach that is taken. So an example. So the approach that I took, that I started taking on the ASVS Agile Security Guide was actually picking up on the structure that had been defined on another OWASP project, that is the cloud security one. So it starts with a feature, and then it goes on to the actual story. So this is kind of an example. So the feature would be the HTTP response content type header specifies a safe character set. Right? And we can define this in a user story as a security engineer or as a developer, depending on the context and the teams that are going to do the work. I want to allow only safe character sets in HTTP responses so that I can prevent unsafe character sets, which could obfuscate malicious activity. Right? This is, again, one way of potentially rewriting this requirement. I think it's 14.4 into a format of a user story. Right? And then we could have the scenario, so the BDD/Gherkin type of approach. So for instance, we've got the scenario of specifying the allowed character sets. So given an HTTP response and an HTTP security header, when I specify my allowed content type, then I choose only UTF-8 and the ISO 88591. Okay, and this relates to 14.4.1. Yeah. And this is kind of the basic idea, right? Is looking at the ASVS requirements, then writing what the feature in the user story is, and then ending, let's say, with the scenario where we provide BDD/Gherkin syntax, so that it's easier for not only engineers to know what is needed of them, but again, going back to my initial point, to potentially enable compliance people that want to get into compliance as code, DSLs, etc., to start thinking in a way that they can actually write a test for, which is what we will go into next. So this is an example of using Chef Inspec, which is a compliance as code DSL, to perform this 14.4.1 test. Right? So this is just this is Ruby based Chef Inspec, but you have an HTTP module, right? That takes a URL, and then you do something, the validation you want to do. So you check the headers, particularly the one on content type, and it should be charset UTF-8. Right? And this is all there is. If I would just say to a compliance person, that ASVS requirement, just write a test for that and I can integrate it. It would probably be daunting. They would probably feel they didn't have the skills to do that. But if we go through the stages of actually writing a user story and then a BDD/Gherkin syntax, then translating this into this gets much, much easier. Right? So I see this also as a way to try and introduce risk and compliance people to start thinking about ways that they can potentially codify what their requirements are. Right. So this is kind of the template that we will be working with once we start breaking out into rooms. So I wanted to make sure that barriers to participate in this workshop were as minimum as possible. So I'm not going to suggest that everyone kind of clones the repo and works directly on the repo, because some people may not know GitHub enough to do that as part of this workshop. So I think it's already on the chat. No, it's not, but I'll give you the link in a moment. So what I'll be asking is I'm going to put the link to this document, which is open to everyone, on the chat. And I'm going to suggest that everyone makes a copy of this presentation where we are going to have this template, and then we can work on the template. And at the end, you just share the link with me and leave it open, and I'll take the action of gathering all of that, and then over the weekend or over the next week, start uploading this to the GitHub repo, so it's reflected there, whatever work we get to do today. But this is kind of the idea of putting it together. We've got a feature, we've got the story, we've got the scenario, and we've got the Gherkin syntax.
Oh, any questions from anybody?
You're not going to make us write Ruby, are you?
No. No. Yeah, the part on the compliances code, and this is, yeah, what I will do is I'm going to show you just quickly after we go through this session what's already on the repo. There's kind of some of this Ruby code for some of the checks. There are some links to cheat sheets and to some other information, CWE, for instance, for a lot of these things that I took from the Security Knowledge Framework, which is another OWASP project. Yeah, and we will just be working on these. The idea is, it depends on how the project evolves, right? At the moment, I think it's fairly open, so that hopefully if more people start being interested and start to contribute, then we can have conversations about what's the best direction. From my point of view, I think it would be useful to have at least links to compliance as code DSL snippets that validate some of the requirements, even if not embedded directly in the project, at least as external links that people could potentially reference. So the idea here is there's 11 of us, so I think we can realistically break out into 3 rooms. And what I'm going to suggest is we go through, yeah, we assign a particular part of the standard to each group. And the idea being that we would open the ASVS standard, that there's the link that I provided at the beginning, and we have, yeah, we spend the rest of the time working on some of these collaboratively, yeah, writing user stories, discussing with each other. There are some people here that probably have more of an application background. There will be other people more risk and compliance. So we will hopefully get people with different backgrounds in the same room, and ideally as even me, right? Even though I'm kind of leading this session today, I have loads to learn from, well, I'm gonna, yeah, sorry, call out names of people I know, but I'm sure that Ivo and Serge, for instance, know much more about development than I do. So if maybe learn from them how to write better user stories, etc., so we can all keep on improving and hopefully normalize security people developing user stories to help our engineering counterparts.
Yeah, that in itself is an experience. So
yeah,
So I'll pause the recording now and
So here we're just going to go just quickly through what's already in the ASVS Agile Delivery Guide repo, just to show you kind of what the structure is. That we will be collaborating today on copies of the presentation that I'm going to send you the link in a minute. But then eventually, yeah, in the next week or so, I'm going to be updating the results here, so it's available for everyone. So an example, content type no sniff. So this is again an example. So yeah, this is badly formatted. Forgot the markdown thing, but anyway. So the idea is that we've got at the top kind of a summary of what the requirement is from ASVS and the reference to the actual part of the ASVS it relates to. Then this is kind of the copy paste description of the requirement as it's written in ASVS, right? So it's really just copy paste to provide context. Then we've got the part on user story where we have a kind of a feature name and then the story itself. Then we've got some scenario, and I'm going to show you another example that has multiple scenarios because in the security knowledge framework, they usually suggest many different ways of potentially achieving the same objective. So I'm kind of covering for that possibility as well. And then where we know where it is, where we can write it, etc. We have an actual snippet of code, either chef in spec or OPA or whatever else that relates to the validation of this specific control. And at the bottom, then we've got the external links, right? So when we typically to cheat sheet series or to CWE, so we can see exactly what it is that is the threat, etc., and keep that relationship to, again, help engineering teams and the risk and compliance teams understand, okay, what does this mean or how does this work? So this is kind of the basic structure for the repo. I'm just going to show you an example where we have potentially different ways of doing this. So sanitizing unstructured data. Let's see if this is a good one. Not necessarily. So I wanted to show one that has different use of eval. I think this is one. Yeah. So this one has two scenarios, right? So eval is a kind of dynamic code execution feature that tends to be possible to be abused a lot. So there are a number of different ways to take care of that. And this is from SKF. So we can refactor the use of eval and use other dynamic execution, other ways to do the same thing. And you can refactor the code to use functions that have a kind of clearly expected returns and not just using a generic eval. Or you can do sanitization and sandboxing, right? So those are kind of two approaches that we can do. On validation and sanitization, we've got CSRF. We also have a few different, no, this is not output encoding. So we can either use encoding libraries and frameworks, and we've got some working syntax or what that means. We could potentially have a detailed specification of the encodings that are required, or standardize the encoding usage between components. Right? And then we've got here loads of links of things that may be relevant on how to approach that. So before we go into breakout rooms, would be good either questions or comments, feedback, anything that you'd like to share at this point would be very welcome.
I got a bit more that I can share with you. There is an international standard, 29,148, which deals with requirements engineering. And one of the documents that it has there actually approaches scenarios. And it doesn't actually link, and that was I was a bit disappointed with not actually being able to find where the hell did this usage of Gherkin came from. Who was the person that came up with the idea in the first place? It's not there. However, it does seem to follow all of the bits that you had there. It does seem to follow the requirements engineering, on not even on those points that I've alluded to before, but also the way that it's structured. But again, from a practitioner point of view, it is really good to have repetition on the story.
Yep.
There is a different thing. That was just to share because I'm aware of that because I'm using it for a different OWASP project. There was also a meeting yesterday with Timon and Roberto were made the suggestion of using exactly the same thing that you're proposing. So for the value of this own project, it would be great because there will be multiple projects from OWASP that can benefit from this. Because like I said, it is contextual, but if we do have examples like this that are really easy to read, not only are going to benefit the work of business people, but the projects in OWASP can actually start to link into the stories to make use of it. So that will be giving it more visibility, and it would be great to have as well.
No, thanks for sharing. Yeah, so I didn't kind of come up with this type of structure myself, as I mentioned. So I kind of copied the structure that the OWASP Cloud Security Project was already doing. Yeah, and I just kind of tried and keep the same type of structure to it.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Looking forward to work on this.
So shall we break out into rooms?
So welcome back. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I think we're gonna do like a wrap up all together, show each team's results.
Yep.
And go through them quickly. Which team wants to go first? File and resources?
Yeah, we can go first.
Feel free.
So let me.
Okay, do you want to go ahead, Lewis?
Okay, sorry about that.
I can. It's your share.
Yes. Am I still sharing my screen? No, I'm not. So I actually cheated a little bit with John. And this is the question I have then for Mario, maybe. I have been working on this, Mario, as you know. We talked about this a few weeks back.
Yep.
So I have all of chapter 12 already translated to Gherkin.
Ah, cool.
Now, what we need to do is validate the scenarios. So John and myself went through some of the scenarios. And I think we went through 12.3.1 and 12.1.1 in a lot of detail. I think you guys saw the messages I was posting, because I think they're great resources for everyone. So the first one is Dan Nord's explanation of what's in a story. It's the blog post of behavior-driven development and Gherkin. I think it's a great starting point for everyone looking into doing this. And the other one was the OWASP Cloud Security Project, which uses this already to create threat attacker stories and defender stories.
Rui, you mentioned you shared this, but if you had shared it in the chat.
Yeah, it's only local.
Yeah, only you.
Is it only local? Okay.
Yeah, to the breakout room. So if you could share again, that would be brilliant.
I will share it again. So give me just a second. I'll share it right away. So this is
you can
one.
copy paste in the chat window even.
I am.
Right.
Let me know if you can see it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's Dan North, and this is OWASP Cloud Security. So those are my 2 points of reference when I talk Gherkin and security. So one is the definition of BDD, basically. Dan North, I'm not sure if he invented it or started with it or was one of the pioneers, whatever. I just find that blog to be very, very good. So the question, Mario, is I have all of chapter 12 ready. I have half of chapter 7 and I have chapter 5. So I have chapters 14, 12, 7, and 5. And I'm looking at working on some more of them.
Yep.
So these are already Gherkinized.
Yep.
Now the question is, should I make a pull request to your repo?
Yeah, do, and I'll approve it.
Okay.
Yep.
I'll do a pull request. So basically, just to cut it short, what we did was we verified this statement, right? So we're talking about file upload. Verify that the application will not accept large files that could fill up storage or cause a denial of service. And we translated it to conditions, given the application has file upload capability and a maximum file size has been defined. When a file size larger than the maximum is defined and uploaded, the file upload fails and you get an error message.
Yep.
So that's basically what we agreed was the best text for that one. And then this one actually cost us a lot of trouble to understand what the spirit was of the statement. So basically, it refers back to CWE22.
Yep.
CWE22 builds paths dynamically. Let me make that bigger. So CWE takes a parameter coming from a user request and appends it to the base directory to create a whatever path.
Yep.
Which means if I pass whatever relative path, instead of reading the username, I would read etc password and happy hacker.
Yep.
So translating this was not that trivial. So basically what we did was, okay, let's think it through. Given the application accesses a file during its operation for whatever reason, no further specified, and the file name is dynamically built with parameters that the user can control, and the file name is normalized. So this is the checks that we're doing, right? So we want to verify that you cannot do this. So the file name is normalized, and the normalized file name is not identically to the dynamically built file name.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Okay.
You gotta teach them young.
So when a specially crafted request is sent to the server, for example, etc password instead of Bob, the request should fail and an entry is logged with relevant information to the use case. So whatever you can log. So that's our interpretation of this.
Yep. And there is also a very good point that we didn't add to the other ones, which is the part on logging or providing the feedback back to either the user or the engineers on what type of error it is.
Yeah, we
definitely something to add to the other ones as well.
We inspired ourselves on Dan Nord's blog post.
Yep.
Because he goes through credit card ATM transactions. So
yeah, that's cool. I didn't know of that resource, so that's really useful.
So when you compare this scenario to the one we were building, it was very clear where things should be input.
Yep.
Into the description. So this helped us a lot. This could be a good resource for everyone interested in BDD.
Yep.
I think it's a very approachable blog post to understand BDD.
Dan is the inventor of BDD. That is the case. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
So that's our contribution, and I'll make a pull request to your repo.
Yes, please. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, Lewis.
Do you guys want to go next, Andre, Mario?
Yep. So I already have VS Code open. So I was making the contributions directly to the repo just to kind of make it easier, because I'm gonna have to upload some of the other stuff as well anyway. So might as well make it life easy for me. So basically, what we've done was go through the authentication part. Particularly, we started at the top with password security. So we've written from 2.1 up to 2.11 to 2.17. Now, seeing the resource that was just shared, we can definitely make some improvements there, but yeah, I'll do that later. So we basically talked about the need to change passwords. So verify user set passwords are at least 8 characters in length. Again, the error message back to the user, etc., is something that I'm going to definitely be adding to all of this. We've done the verifying that password of at least 64 characters are permitted, and that passwords of more than 128 characters are denied. When I set criteria for password length, permit up to those, no more than those, right? And then etc. We've done password truncation. This one is a bit more complex due to the multiple spaces being replaced, etc. But we kind of tried to simply just use the but statement Andre suggested, which is also part of the specification. There's password truncation. Without in the second scenario with that, we printable Unicode characters. So we both understood. I did not know there were non-printable Unicode characters. Now I do. So we went to all of that. We only written this one kind of on the positive, so not on the validation that a non-printable aren't being used. But if we're just allowing what is printable, then by definition, you could obviously create a second scenario where you're only validating that the negative of it. Right? Depends on how people want to approach it. Yeah, changing passwords. So allowing users to change their own password. Yeah. And verify password change functionality requires users current and new password. Yep. So I now, after seeing your work, I can see how this can be much better. We'll work on it. So thank you very much for that. And finally, the one that we've done was, which is a bit more complex, is 217, which relates to password submitting. So basically verifying breached passwords, either locally or through an API. And for this one, we ended up creating 4 scenarios, one for verifying breached passwords locally for initial passwords, another one for changing passwords. And we were kind of doing the same for those, but we ran out of time. There are also 2 scenarios here. You can either do it locally or you can use an API type service that Anthony was sharing with us. There's a service out there. Could you say the name again? Sorry, Anthony.
It was Spec Ops.
Spec Ops.
Yeah, there's a link there that I think Andre shared as well. So if we can get it back into the main, that'd be good. Yep.
Yeah, if you could share that in main would be great.
I'm trying, guys, but no, I got it. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks. I'm on my phone, so I can't copy and paste easy. Thanks, Andre. Cheers.
Yep. So, and that's basically it. That's what we got to. So we went from 2.1 to 2.1.7, and then obviously offline, the adding the part on the user messages back, etc. I think is probably really important for it. So I will improve those as well.
That's awesome. Ivo and Sergey, I'm really interested in your experience because this is the very first time you tried this.
Right, yeah, we tried it. We weren't even sure what we meant to do. Anyways, so we're working on the file verification requirements, and we think we only covered 2, which is 12.2.1 and 12.1.1. And let me quickly share my screen.
I see. So there was some confusion. So yeah, I assigned you guys to the session management.
Oh, okay.
That's okay.
Yeah. So what we ended up doing is just we ended up writing like for this feature 12.2.1, we just wrote 3 scenarios. 2 of those would be successful file upload, and 1 would be unsuccessful. So yeah, this is where we're not sure whether we need to write successful file uploads at all. So essentially, it's just we just like describing a background, given the file is obtained from trusted source, whatever, and then we at the end we just expecting again in our interpretation it was a HTTP code.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and then we also, again, this is like very, really high detail. Like, so I'm not sure how good this feature files are. and also we looked at this. Actually, 12.1.2 about around the zip bomb. So I guess like again because we didn't have a user story and we didn't really know what archive types we're talking about. Like we just assumed we're talking about zip files, zip archive, and it just again describes the 2 scenarios: 1 successful, 1 unsuccessful file upload.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. cool.
And Mario, are you gonna like combine these with the other groups?
Yep. So I think they ended up working on some slightly different ones. So I think the first one is the same, but then there were some other ones. Yeah, but what I'll be kind of doing over the next week is kind of going through whatever was produced. Is there a way that you can share that, Serge?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yep. Actually, I work with Serge, so you can probably put it on our own company Slack, and I'll take it from there. It's probably easier. Because the other group, Lewis, he was also kind of he's going to make the upload directly to the repo, so then it makes it easier for me to integrate all of this.
Yeah, if you can kind of have a look at the two different versions and come up with what you think is a better representation of what we should be submitting, that would really help as a template for other work we could do.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
So
and also just for everyone's awareness, so I've built the initial repo kind of on my own, but in the meantime, I've agreed with Didar and Dennis from the Open Security Summit. So probably in the next week, I'll also be uploading this to a more permanent repo inside the Open Security Summit organization. I don't know if it's an actual organization or not from a GitHub perspective, but it's going to be living there.
Yeah, Open Security Summit has an organization there. Yeah, and when we're ready, we're gonna we can put this back to OWASP for them to make it even more accessible to more people.
Yep. So brilliant. Thank you all very much for joining. I hope it was an interesting, different type of experience to some of us at least. Yeah, it was really interesting to working with the people that ended up in my group with Anthony and Andrea. And yeah, thank you all very much. Hopefully we can keep on contributing to the repo and take it from there. I'd really like to, so one of the things that I've talked with Didar is we are probably going to make this kind of a monthly session to kind of get together and do a bit more work on this, so that hopefully within the next few months we could have the whole of the standards covered.
Another 2 hours, yeah,
Yep.
month. And if people want to work on this offline, they can, right?
Yep.
They can submit to the GitHub repo. Okay.
And if you've got the details from everyone, once we move this over to Open Security Summit, we'll share the links again.
Yeah. Thank you all
Thank you,
so
guys.
much.
Thank you all very much.
Great talk and good to meet everyone and work with you again. Thank you.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers,
Thank you all
guys.
much. Have a great weekend.